Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. This is kind of a downer topic for Friday, so I'm just giving you fair warning. But there was an article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, and in addition to that, there are stories, obviously, of the flooding that's going on in New Orleans. And so I kind of want to put all of those together and talk about them for a minute because, well, it bugs me to think that the most powerful nation on earth is falling apart. And I think it's falling apart because we have all of our priorities screwed up. Look, I've always said that I think we need a social safety net. I'm not just for the government eliminate. First of all, I don't think we can legally or constitutionally. I don't think we can just up in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, or any of the other entitlement programs that we have. And we might be able to phase them out over time, but to just rip Medicaid or Medicare or Social Security out from grandma or grandpa right now, I just think would be unconstitutional. But with the amount of money that we are, remember yesterday's podcast? I explained how the Department of Health and Human Services was now spending $100 billion a month. $100 billion a month. Now, I want you to think of all of the things, and I know $100 billion is, well, that's pocket change to the federal government. But nonetheless, it's a boatload of money. So here is the rabbit hole that I went down last night and this morning. It started with an article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal that had this headline: PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, knew for years its lines could spark wildfires and didn't fix them. PG&E Corporation knew for years that hundreds of miles of high-voltage power lines could fail and spark fires, yet it repeatedly failed to perform the necessary upgrades. So the Wall Street Journal did a Freedom of Information Act request, and they did it in a connection with a regulatory dispute over PG&E's spending on its electrical grid. And those FOIA documents show that the company, Pacific Gas and Electric, has been aware that parts of its 18,500-mile transmission lines have reached the end of their useful lives. Do you know how old some of these are? They're literally 100 years old, and they've done nothing to fix them. Even though they hired consultants, they brought in firms, they put up drones, they did everything, and they knew the lines were dangerous. And so now Paradise, California has been wiped off the face of the earth because the power lines sparked those fires that destroyed that town. Are they going to be held liable? Probably so, although I think they've gone into Chapter 11 to try to preserve their capital so they can fix what they can fix. Some of these lines were so old that they were actually under consideration for placement on the National Register of Historic Places. Talk about a screwed up priority. Now, I'm all for historic preservation, within reason. But if you have a power transmission, if you have a steel transmission power line that was built in the 1890s or the early 1900s, and you're now wanting to preserve that, and you're wanting to preserve that because it's so old, how about we recognize that maybe we ought to put one in a museum somewhere so people can go look at it? Because if you have a power line out in the middle of a forest somewhere, the likelihood that any one individual in the country is ever going to see that power line is virtually nil. Oh, you might see it if you happen to be flying over. You're on some commercial flight going through, this particular area of California, you might see it. But otherwise, you're not going to see it. That's what I mean by screwed up priorities. People's homes were lost. Lives were lost. All because both the regulators, I'm not blaming just PG&E, but both PG&E and federal regulators both failed to do their jobs. You had one job: supply electricity and do it in a safe, reasonable, cost-efficient manner. They failed to do that. That story then led me to this story, and I haven't even gotten to New Orleans yet. U.S. authorities have unsealed a corruption indictment against two former top officials in Puerto Rico for directing some $15 million plus in contracts to favored businesses, allegedly edging out firms for lucrative government work despite allegations of being unqualified. The two former Puerto Rico leaders, Julia Keller, who was the secretary of the island's Department of Education before stepping down, and Angela Avila Marrero, who led Puerto Rico's Health Insurance Administration until last month, were arrested by FBI agents on Wednesday. Prosecutors write in the indictment that the conspiracy involved the two former public officials handing four associates who had an inside track to contracts. And what they did is once they got the contracts, they say the contractors benefited by paying unauthorized commissions to other individuals to lobby government for more contracts, a dynamic authorities described as a corrupt bidding process. Once again, corruption. Screwed up priorities. You don't give a rat's ass about your Department of Education. You don't care about Puerto Rico's Health Insurance Administration. All you care about is lining your own pockets. Then that led me to the story about New Orleans. Now, by the time you by the time you listen to this particular podcast, I don't know what will have happened in New Orleans. But I can tell you that Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, and then again very early this morning, there were reports about the Mississippi is expected to crest at record flood levels sometime tomorrow, sometime Saturday. The Army Corps of Engineers, responsible for at least the reconstruction of the levees post-Katrina in 2005-2006, couldn't even agree on their own graphics that they were passing out to public information officers and to the media on Thursday and Friday about whether or not the levees would be topped or whether or not the levees would be breached. And there's a big difference. Let me explain the difference. The difference is if the levees are breached, in other words, if the levees give way and now there's a big-ass hole in the levees, that causes serious flooding problems that continue, which is what happened to us during Katrina, because once they breach, the water just continues to pour in until it reaches equilibrium. And equilibrium may mean that you have entire neighborhoods, like the lower Ninth Ward, that are going to be completely flooded out and completely destroyed. So now here we are, 14 years later, and the Army Corps of Engineers cannot get on the same page about whether or not the levees have been reconstructed to meet a certain flood level. And we're now going through a debate. Now, I think St. Bernard Parish, or maybe it's Plaquemines Parish, one of the parishes, has already ordered a mandatory evacuation because of the flood cresting of the Mississippi River. But in New Orleans, they're still debating whether or not to evacuate. Haven't we seen this play before? Everywhere I turn, let me add another one. As long as I'm on this tirade, let me add another one. Have you heard about Denver International Airport? Denver International Airport, which I forget was in I can't remember the year that it opened now, 1990, whatever year it was. Denver International Airport, at the time that it was built, had problems with the tile, had problems with the concrete. There were all sorts of problems at the time that the airport itself was built. But now, because we can't let anything, mayors and city councils always have to be seen doing something, right? So now they want to redesign the entire airport. One of, if not one of the newest airports in the entire country, and they want to redo it already. Well, now we find out that the company based in Spain that is designing and reconstructing the Great Hall, the terminal building, is almost 3 years behind budget and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. And when the mayor of Denver is asked about it, well, you can rest assured that we're going to make certain that the taxpayer dollars are wisely spent and we're going to get our money's worth. That doesn't answer the question. The question is, how did we get to that point in the first place? How did something get moved along? This is like the VA hospital in Colorado that, again, ended up years delayed and billions of dollars over budget because nobody's paying attention. And I think nobody pays attention because there is no character. There is no leadership in the government. And I also believe this. I had an old college professor that, for whatever reason, became a good friend of mine. And he had this theory, which I, to this day, put credence in, that any organization can become so large that if you don't manage the size of the organization, if you don't keep up with the management and the operations concurrent with the growing size of the organization, that the organization will implode upon itself because it simply becomes unmanageable. And I think that's what's happened with government at all levels. I know the Puerto Rican government is not very big, but it's too big for these two yahoos to handle because they're too busy doing corrupt bidding to line their own pockets. PG&E has apparently become too old and too stale to even care about the people that it serves, to make certain that the power that it is providing, that they're doing so in a reasonable and safe manner, such that people lost their lives and they lost their homes. And then we have the airport. 3 years. 3 years over budget. 3 years behind schedule. And hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. Oh, and while I'm at it, think about this. We have all these highway construction projects going on in Colorado. If you're a tourist that has been in Colorado and you've gone anywhere, almost anywhere in Colorado, you understand that virtually every major interstate system in Colorado somewhere is under construction. Now we learn that, for example, the interstate highway that is near where I live, and they're putting in some express lanes and toll lanes, that's running behind schedule. That the expansion of toll lanes and express lanes on I-25 south of Denver toward Colorado Springs, that's now over budget and behind schedule. And the replacement of I-70 between the mountains and like Colorado Boulevard, going through just north of downtown Denver, that project, which is just beginning, is already over budget and behind schedule. We are losing the ability to govern ourselves. And I think part of that is the governments have become too big and we lack the kind of honest public service kind of leadership in government. It's either corrupt or incompetent. And then the elected officials are never held accountable. Michael Hancock, the mayor of Denver, just reelected to another 4-year term, knowing that this airport project was so massively behind schedule and so massively over budget, voters in Denver were just like, who cares? Nobody cares. I just say all of that because I just want you to stop and just think. Every time that somebody says either there ought to be a law or the government ought to be doing this or the government ought to be doing that, I want you to think of everything I just outlined. Pacific Gas and Electric and the federal regulators that oversee those, plus the state regulators in California too. The territorial leaders in Puerto Rico, the municipal leaders in Denver. You have all of this corruption and incompetence. You have all of these cost overruns. But oh, by golly, we want Medicare for all. We want to expand the scope of the federal government into almost every aspect of our lives. Why do we think that if we can't even build an airport or a VA hospital or an interstate highway, or we can't even maintain an electrical grid, what makes us think that the government can come in and provide competent, cost-efficient health care or housing or nutrition or you name it. Virtually everything is corrupt. And I just find it disheartening. So watch the weather, watch Pacific Gas and Electric, watch the airport, and watch the highways, and see if I'm not right. You know, I have not for maybe a week, which for me is a record, I've not for probably a week talked about the First Amendment, or more generically, free speech. But it was just over about a year ago that French President Emmanuel Macron came to the United States to import two potentially invasive species to Washington. One was a tree, and the other was a crackdown on free speech. Now, you may recall the tree died. They had to dig it up, send it to quarantine. I think that's the least of the problems that Macron brought to the United States. I think the more dangerous thing was his acorn of speech controls, a proposal that resulted in rapturous applause from clueless politicians in the United States. Macron and his government are attempting to unilaterally scrub out the internet of any hateful thoughts. The French Parliament has moved toward a new law that would give internet companies like Facebook and Google 24 hours to remove hateful speech from their sites or face a fine of $1.4 million per violation. Now, they're going to vote on this next week. Germany passed a similar measure last year, and they've already imposed fines of $56 million. Now, the French and Germans they've absolutely given up in trying to convince the United States to surrender its free speech protections. They realize that they do not have to, because by imposing crippling penalties, major companies like Facebook and Google, as much as I get pissed off at these two, they're going to be forced into censoring speech under poorly defined standards. And the result, I was going to say the unintended results, but I think it is actually the intended results, is going to be the curtailment of the greatest invention fostering free speech in the history of the world, and it is all happening without a whimper of opposition from Congress, or even worse, from almost every civil liberty organization in the country. I think what scares me the most about Macron and what's going on in Europe is that they know they can limit speech not only in their countries. If France and Germany want to do this, while I personally am opposed to it, it's their country, they can do what they want to do. But I think what worries me is they know that they can limit speech not only in their countries, but practically speaking, they can limit speech in the United States and elsewhere. I'll give you an example. Back in 2013, a group of Jewish students used French law to sue Twitter to force Twitter to hand over the identities of anonymous posters of comments that these Jewish students deemed to be anti-Semitic. Now, I am, with every bone in my body, with every fiber of my being, pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, and I am anti-Semitic. But I got to give credit to Twitter, because Twitter fought to protect the anonymity of the posters, which I believe that's what Twitter should have done. I believe that speech as abhorrent, vulgar, bigoted, hateful, ugly, sexist, whatever adjective that you want to use, other than speech that literally incites violence, is protected under the First Amendment. But again, back to Twitter. Twitter did fight to protect the anonymity, but the European courts ruled against Twitter, and ultimately Twitter caved in. So anonymity is being rolled back as rapidly as free speech is being crushed. And Macron knows that European speech controls are likely to metastasize throughout the internet. They've already laid waste to free speech in Europe. They have laws that criminalize speech under these really vague standards, referring to inciting or intimidating others based on their race or religion. I'll give you an example. Fashion designer John Guiano was found guilty in a French court on charges of making anti-Semitic comments against at least 3 people in a Paris bar. Now, do I find that offensive? Of course I do. Somebody probably should have, I was going to say somebody probably should have punched him out, but I suppose that's speech that was inciting violence. But at the sentencing, the judge read out a list of the bad words that were used by Giano to these 2 other people. Quote, he said dirty whore at least 1,000 times. And based on that, he was found guilty of hate speech. Then there's this other case. The father of French conservative presidential candidate Marine Le Pen was fined because he had called people from the Roma minority smelly. Yeah, smelly. Apparently that's now hate speech. A German man was arrested for having a ringtone with the voice of Adolf Hitler. A German conservative politician was placed under criminal investigation for a tweet in which she accused the Popo of appeasing barbaric gang raping Muslim hordes of men. Could be factually correct and still be hate speech. How's this metastasizing? Well, now there are renewed calls in the United Nations to make hate speech a type of international crime. Now, you turn to the Muslims. What do they want? Well, they want blasphemy included. Israel wants anti-Semitism to be criminalized. And even in this country, politicians like Howard Dean and a bunch of academics have declared that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Remember, I played the soundbite for you of Frederica Wilson, that dumbass congresswoman from Florida, who has called for people to be prosecuted for making fun of members of Congress? You see, that's how progressives get their foot in the door. Why? We can't call congressmen names. We can't make fun of them. Why, that's unacceptable. You know, the sad irony of France leading these efforts to curb free speech is powerful, because France was once the bastion of liberty. France has now become one of the greatest international threats to free speech. Christian Toto's on vacation this week, so Christian's not going to be here, but that's not going to keep me from playing some clips from The View. And actually, these clips fit pretty well in with the whole concept of free speech. Yesterday, co-host Joy Behar lamented to her Democrat guest, who happened to be the accidental senator from Colorado, Michael Bennet, an aspiring presidential candidate that's polling at about, 0.0%. She gushes to Michael Bennet that these immigrations and customs enforcement raids are reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
So, here's another outrage for you. There are reports today that Trump intends to move forward with his immigration raids targeting migrant families this weekend. I thought it was supposed to be gangs coming from these places, not families with children. He's going to, raid these people's houses and what have you. It's very reminiscent of Nazi Germany, just saying. I know you're not supposed to make that connection, but I've been around long enough and I've read enough to know that this is very similar to what happened to the Jews. Go in and take them out of their houses. What are the Democrats going to do?
Oh, so, Joy, you've read enough history that you think you can make a comparison between rounding up the Jews, confining them into the ghetto, and then transferring them from the ghetto to the concentration camps. And that's what we're going to do by not rounding people up. Although, if you want to describe it that way, let's do that. Let's describe it as rounding people up. Do you know who Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is going to round up? First, people who've come to this country illegally. 2, people who have come to this country illegally and have been afforded all of the procedural and substantive due process to which they are entitled in both federal court and immigration courts. And 3, people who have come here illegally, been afforded all of their due process rights, either failed to show up for court or maybe did show up for court and lost their case. And then 5th, all of those same things again, came here illegally, got all their due process rights, were either found guilty or not guilty, were issued deportation orders or not, and then, if they were ordered to be deported, failed to show up for their deportation. Those are fugitives. Those are no different. Let me just draw a fairly simple analogy here. You get a speeding ticket. I want to make this as innocuous as possible. You know, you get stopped on Interstate 25 by a Colorado State trooper, and you get a traffic infraction. It's not a summons, it's an infraction. So it's not really a criminal matter yet. It's just an infraction. The deal with the infraction is you have 2 choices. You can either, well, you have to sign the summons there, or not the summons, but you have to sign the citation. Then you can either go online and pay it or mail your check in, or you can show up for court and demand to have a trial, have it set for trial, and then you can take your traffic ticket to trial and probably lose. Or you can do this. You can just not show up. You can not pay the ticket, not show up for court, and when your name is called on the date and time that you were ordered to appear, if you had not paid the fine, guess what happens? A bench warrant is issued for your arrest. A notation is put in your driving record, and your driver's license becomes suspended. You're now a fugitive. So if you get arrested again, or stopped again, I should say, to keep the analogy as clean as possible, if you get stopped again for speeding or crossing the yellow line or failure to turn on your turn signal or whatever it might be, and the officer approaches the car and asks for your driver's license and registration, and he runs it, and he sees that your license has been suspended or that there's an outstanding bench warrant for you in some county, 100, 200 miles away somewhere, you're going to get your butt hauled into court. It's the same thing. We're not putting people in ghettos, Joy. We're not sending them to death camps. You, ma'am, are ignorant. I know that we shouldn't make fun of old people, but Joe Biden was speaking to, I think it was to the Council on Foreign Relations. That doesn't make any difference. Uncle Joe, guess what?
To that end, as president, I will take decisive steps to renew our American values by returning transparency to our government. We believe in freedom of religion. That's why I will end the Muslim ban.
In the Muslim ban? Can somebody send Uncle Joe an email and let Uncle Joe that there is no Muslim ban? What else did he say? Let's see.
We believe in free speech. That's why I'll end the gag rule, the global gag rule that prevents money from getting to NGOs who even talk about family planning. We believe in the power of free press. That's why I'll return immediately to daily press briefings in the White House.
Yeah, because without those daily press briefings, we never have a clue what President Trump is saying. We don't have a clue what the communications office is saying. I find that fascinating about the daily press briefings because they really are just a circus. There's no need for those. You have a president that's on Twitter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have a president that every single time that there is a meeting in the Oval Office, or every single time that he's walking out on the South Lawn to board Marine One, he stops and he talks to the press. And he'll stand and talk forever, taking questions the entire time. But oh, by golly, we haven't had a press briefing in the briefing Brady room in months, and that's destroying the free press. I think Uncle Joe's a little too old.
State Department and the Defense Department. We are a nation of immigrants. But President Trump took those words, those literal words, nation of immigrants, out of the statement, the mission statement of our Citizenship and Immigration Services. I will restore those words. It matters. Our Statue of Liberty, not very far from here, invites us.
Oh, here we go. He's going to misquote the poem. The poem. He's going to misquote the poem. Here we go.
And welcome the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I'll reverse Trump's detrimental asylum policies.
Detrimental asylum policies? The asylum policies are indeed detrimental. They're detrimental to those people who come here thinking that they're going to be entitled to asylum, and they end up being human trafficked. They end up being raped, murdered. They end up dying in rivers trying to cross the Rio Grande. The asylum policy itself is wrong.
Raise our target for refugees to a level commensurate with our responsibility and the unprecedented global need that exists. The Biden administration would immediately end the horrific practice of separating families at our borders, holding children in for-profit detentions. There's no need for us to do that and still protect our borders.
I noticed the clip that I was watching of Uncle Joe doing this. He was broadcasting it on his YouTube page. 72 views, 80 views, 67 views. Hell's bells. I get more people listening to my podcast than Uncle Joe gets talking to the Council on Foreign Relations. Nancy Pelosi, also carrying on the mantra of Donald Trump terrorizing everybody.
Their decency, care about the children at the border. It's about values that the president does not seem to share, and we saw this morning when he announced his heartless raids on families this coming Sunday. When he announced this before, I called, God bless you, some people of faith about this, evangelicals who support the president for other reasons, but who have been good on immigration issues, but usually. And basically, they were very concerned that this goes too far because these raids were not what they signed up for with President Trump. And I think their calls to the president made a difference. Basically, what they said to me is, on Sunday, this is the Hispanic evangelicals, on Sunday, west of the Mississippi, our people are in church. And as they prepare to go to church, they feel very threatened and scared by these raids. So hopefully the president will think again about it, or these groups will weigh in once again.
I have just being as sincere as I can be, I have a hard time feeling sorry for these people. I get that they come from S-hole countries. The world is full of S-hole countries. But even in the S-hole countries that exist around this planet, there have been great strides in human progress. Poverty levels at all-time lows, crime at all-time lows. But that doesn't mean that in individual countries or in individual cities and towns and these S-hole countries that life is miserable. I believe, in fact, I don't believe, I know. I've been there, done that, seen it myself. Crappy places, crappy homes, crappy governments, a crappy life. But they are the ones that made the choice to not come here the right way. Now, to be perfectly objective, part of that is also our fault for not reforming our immigration system. If we are, as Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi all like to say, we're a nation of immigrants, then why don't we fix the immigration system? If we really want immigrants to come to this country, why don't we set it up so that there is an efficient, legal way for people to come here that have skills, abilities that we need in this country, as opposed to just opening the borders and just saying, if you can make it across the river, come on in. We do a disservice to them, and we also do a disservice to ourselves when we somehow blame ourselves for the choices that they make. We fought a revolution in this country. We fought against an oppressive government. We took arms up against our own government and said no more. If they live in such crappy places, doesn't take a lot. All it takes is a determination to change your government, and you can do it. We're living proof of that. This story is great. Remember when I told you about the Detroit Musical Festival, the Afro Future Fest, and they were going to charge a premium for white people to attend? So if you were a person of preferred pigmentation, you were able to get in for like $10 in advance compared to $20 in advance for a white person. Well, apparently they've dropped that controversial plan. Here's what they wrote. Here's what the story says. The Afro Future Fest sparked outrage with its ticketing model for the August 3rd event that saw people of color paying a maximum of $20 compared to $40 for non-POC tickets. That's non-people of color tickets. Biracial rapper Tiny Jag was so enraged that she publicly withdrew from performing, and ticketing website Eventbrite threatened to bar the festival from its services, according to The Independent. So the festival finally backed down, but blamed threats from racists rather than the race-based disparity itself. They said, for the safety of our community, family elders who received threats from white supremacists, and youth who were subjected to seeing racist comments on our Instagram page, Afro Future Fest has changed our ticketing model to $20 general admission and suggested donation for non-POC on Eventbrite. So they've talked about that's like a backdoor apology, a backhanded apology. So we're not going to charge more. We're going to suggest more. We're going to charge the $20 if you're black or a POC, a person of color, which always fascinates me because what if I'm Rachel Dolezal? Do I identify as black? We're going to suggest that if you're a white person, you should opt in to pay more. Yeah, I don't think so. I thought that I was done with women's soccer until this story broke. It seems that no matter how obnoxiously she disgraces the country that she was regrettably given the honor to represent, they just can't seem to kick the odious Megan Rapinoe off the U.S. team. Because it is only how she plays the game that counts, right? It's all about meritocracy. And then again, maybe it's not. I had not even heard of this woman. Jaylene Hinkle? This according to Fox News. Jaylene Hinkle, 26, a native of Colorado who played college soccer at Texas Tech University, is a defender for the North Carolina Courage of the National Women's Soccer League. Now, last year, Hinkle's team was the first to win both the National Women's Soccer League Shield for best regular season play and the National Women's Soccer League Championship in the same year. That same woman, Janelle Hinkle, also helped the Western New York Flash to win the championship in 2016. But I guess there's a problem. Jaylene Hinkle is what the liberal media would call controversial. You see, back in 2015, back in the Dark Ages, Hinkle had objected publicly to the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that legalized same-sex marriage. Now, she certainly wasn't the only one enraged by that example of the leftist socialist engineering. Apparently, Hinkle wrote on Instagram at the time, I believe with every fiber in my body that what was written 2,000 years ago in the Bible is undoubtedly true. This world may change, but Christ in his word never will. And then in 2017, Hinkle drew criticism when she declined to play in 2 matches for the U.S. women's national team, reportedly because she didn't want to wear special team jerseys that recognize Gay Pride Month. She felt that her job was, get this, to play soccer, and their job was not to promote something that morally she objected to. Well, that attitude got her booed when her team played in Portland, Oregon. And then later, she was dropped from the U.S. national team for reasons solely related to soccer, according to team officials. But Hinkle's public persona contrasts sharply with that of Team USA captain Megan Rapinoe, who also plays in the National Women's Soccer League. So do you think it was because she's Christian? Do you think it's because she objected to the social engineers that want to push the gay agenda off on everybody? Or do you think it's, well, I think I know exactly what it is. You see, you can't hold views that go against leftist orthodoxy. Even if, now, if you refuse to wear a team uniform, I can see that, okay, if you refuse to abide by the rules of the game, the rules of the team, and you refuse to wear these jerseys that we want you to wear, that's probably grounds for discipline. But how much of it do you really think is, yeah, you don't fit in with the politically correct agenda? I think it probably has more to do with the latter than it does the former. Think of all the dumb things that we did when we were kids. You know, we rode in the back of pickup trucks. We rode in the back seat of a car without not sitting in a car seat, no seat belts, didn't do anything. But of all the things that I've heard, I don't think I've ever heard this one. Dixon, Illinois.
At 11, a woman is facing child endangerment charges after police say that she put children in a kiddie pool and then placed that pool on top of a car before driving around. Police arrested Jennifer Janice Yeager yesterday afternoon in Dixon. And this is a look at that car. Officers say Yeager drove into town to inflate the pool, then had her 2 daughters ride inside of it on top of the car to hold it down on the drive home. She is now facing several charges, including endangering the health of...
I'm sorry. Hey, kids, let's go fill the pool up. Okay. I need you to climb up and sit on the top of the car and the pool to hold it down while we go home. Okay, Mommy, let's go. Good grief. Johnson County, Texas. Deputies determined that a missing Texas man was reportedly eaten by more than one of his dogs, according to television station KTVT.
Bone fragments are the remains of a man reported missing more than 2 months ago, and they've connected the man's dogs to his death. The remains were found on the man's property on King Cotton Drive near the town of Venus. Jason Allen joins us live in Johnson County with the story. Jason?
And Gilma, Freddie Mac's family had actually come here in early May looking for him, but instead all they found was the dogs on the property. And that's all sheriff investigators could see, too, until they could distract those dogs and get in for a closer look.
57-year-old Freddie Mac lived a reclusive life on this small property near Venus with more than a dozen mixed-breed large dogs as his only companions.
And just I'll walk around with the dogs. Talking to the dogs or fussing with the dogs.
Neighbor Michael Sargent said that's why it didn't make sense Mac would leave the dogs uncared for when he disappeared in May. But now investigators believe he never left, dying somehow on the property, and the dogs removed most of the evidence.
Yeah, and we'll never know. It really doesn't matter. It was a horrible event either way, you know, and our heart just goes out to the family. It was just a tragic way to lose a family member.
Sheriff Adam King said after flying drones to try to look around safely, then seizing the dogs and getting a search warrant, a single bone fragment grabbed an investigator's attention. When they looked closer, they found the dogs had consumed strips of clothing that appeared to match the one outfit Mac was known to wear. This week, a DNA test on 2 bone pieces confirmed it was him. All the dogs had to be euthanized except for 3, the only 3 the sheriff said appeared to be friendly.
You know what amazes me about this whole, what amazes me about this whole story is he's been missing or hasn't been heard from since April 19. Almost 3 months. 90 days. I think we sometimes forget. I mean, I know it's an odd story that, some guy's missing for 3 months and then the sheriff finally figures out that, he died of either natural causes or they don't think there was any foul play. And then when they send drones in to start looking over the property, they discover the dogs. And when they are able to finally get control of the dogs, then they start finding bone fragments and finding clothing and that sort of stuff. But I'm more fascinated by the fact that as connected as we are as a society, that somebody can be missing for 3 months and nobody bothers to go out and, okay, we know where he lives. The neighbors knew where he was. Nobody called? Nobody said, hey, we haven't seen him. We haven't heard from him. You might want to send somebody out here. Maybe just do, what do they call those calls where they just do there's a phrase for it, where they just do a welfare check. Just do a welfare check on the guy. 57 years old, completely eaten by your dogs. And of course it does raise the question whether or not, is dog really man's best friend? And I haven't gotten a copy of it yet. And if I did, I would only be reading the stories. I wouldn't be looking at the pictures. But apparently Playboy decided that it was time to take America's temperature about how they feel about sex. Survey says most people aren't running a fever. The survey results are highlighted in Playboy's gender and sexuality issue for summer of 2019. I haven't gotten my copy yet. It found that more than half of Americans think they're having less sex than their peers and also think they should be having way more. Now, when I read that sentence, I'm thinking to myself, if you think you're having less sex than your peers, did you ever stop to think that maybe your peers are being a little bragging about how much sex they're getting? And if you think you should be having way more, everybody's lying. Everybody's lying. Playboy executive editor Shane Michael Singh said in an interview that we are in a sex drought, a sex recession. People are less interested in sex. They're afraid to have sex because of Me Too and Harvey Weinstein Gate and all of those things. I know this story's fiction. You know why? They don't blame Donald Trump. Singh said that many signs in current culture are leading Americans to believe that people are having more sex than they really are. You see, Your Honor, I knew exactly where this story was going. But in a country where sex sells, it seems America still falls in a vanilla category when it comes to how they actually live. He says that we're still pretty conservative in our sexual attitudes. We still value emotional connection. We value long-term intimacy. We still value sex with spouses. So this dating app culture and this idea of open relationships becoming a little more exciting isn't changing how we feel about who we actually want to go to bed with at night. We need a Playboy to tell us that. Nope. They're all lying. Speaking of lying, I guess this whole thing about climate change we can just forget about. There's a new study by researchers at Turku University in Finland that found that the human contribution to a rise of 0.1 degrees Celsius in global temperature over the last century is just 0.01 degrees Celsius. The title of the paper, No Experimental Evidence for the Significant Anthropogenic Climate Change, was published by, hang on while I bastardize these names, Jyrki Kapanen and Pekka Malmi. The study found that, quote, during the last 100 years, the temperature is increased about 0.1 degrees Celsius because of carbon dioxide. The human contribution was about 0.01 degrees Celsius. The two scientists conclude that global temperatures are controlled primarily by cloud cover and that only a small part of the increased carbon dioxide concentration is anthropogenic. The study also calls into question the claims of the United Nations IPCC, which concluded that global temperatures are largely driven by human activity. Now, obviously, the method and results of the study can be debated, but I think it again illustrates how there is no overwhelming consensus on man-made global warming. Just another little notch there to take down the hysteria a little bit. And, of course, you know that I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. And when Facebook isn't issuing fatwas against dumbassery, Facebook busies itself by meddling in elections. Yes, We're all worried about Russians meddling in elections, but apparently Facebook likes to meddle in elections. Now, we know that Ireland has long been a bastion of Catholicism, but following last year's Irish abortion referendum, the country altered its constitution to allow abortion for the sake of convenience. What nobody's talked about, though, is the role that Facebook played in that referendum. Here's Mark Zuckerberg at the Aspen Ideas Festival, basically just saying, yeah, we meddled in the Irish referendum.
Having a bill like that passed as the floor, I think, would be positive. There are other types of laws around the world that I think would be positive as well. For example, we had an issue in, this is not an American example, but we had an issue in Ireland. In the last year, there was a referendum on abortion. And during that election, leading up to that referendum, a bunch of pro-life American groups advertised in this leading up to this Irish election.
Okay, let's just pause a moment. So the Irish are going to have a referendum on whether or not to permit abortion. Anti-abortion groups, pro-life groups, start putting ads in Facebook feeds seen in Ireland. Somehow that catches the eye of Facebook. Why would they care whether or not people are putting political ads, both for and against, I presume, both for and against the referendum? Isn't Facebook all about, as they keep telling us, free speech? Isn't really Facebook about the exchange of ideas? I mean, after all, he's at the Aspen Ideas Festival.
To try to influence public opinion there. And we went to the Irish and...
So we went to the Irish. Now, just think about just back it up. Listen closely.
A bunch of pro-life American groups advertised in this leading up to this Irish election to try to influence public opinion there. And we went...
Isn't that the purpose of buying advertisements? To influence opinions? Whether it be, hey, buy this bar of soap or buy this deodorant or vote for or against this particular issue? Isn't that how Facebook makes its money? I thought it was. They continued.
The Irish and asked folks there, well, how do you want us to handle this? You have no laws on the books that are relevant for whether we should be allowing this kind of speech in your election. And really, this doesn't feel like the kind of thing that a private company should be making a decision on. And their response at the time was, we don't currently have a law, so you need to, make whatever decision you want to make. We ended up not allowing the ads. But at the end of the day, that feels like the kind of thing around the world in different democracies that you'd really want the local...
So in essence, Mark Zuckerberg's saying, we saw all these pro-life ads, and so we went to the Irish government and said, do you want these or not? They meddled in the election. They blocked pro-life ads ahead of Ireland's abortion vote. Yeah, we don't need to worry about the Russians. We need to worry about Facebook itself. Our first taxpayer relief shot comes to us near Fort Lauderdale, Florida, courtesy of Channel 7 News.
Crooks behind a rough robbery, their crime ending with a deadly drop-off. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. The clerk turning the tables after being pistol whipped.
The robbers walking in and then running off, but one of them would not survive. Brandon Beyer explains what happened to the crooks seconds after the crime on camera.
An armed man strikes a clerk at a gas station near Fort Lauderdale Wednesday afternoon. Seconds later, another man reaches into the cash register, grabs money. The clerk is pushed to the ground. It all happened at this Valero on Sunrise Boulevard near 24th Avenue. And what happens next takes place off camera. The clerk shooting at the suspects as they run away.
Two guys came inside the gas station and they put a gun on me and they took the money. And I went outside, shot at him twice.
One of the robbers was hit. He'd later be dropped off at this Hollywood fire station and die on the way to the hospital. The clerk clearly rattled at the scene.
Thank God he's all right. A little shaken up, but he's okay.
Witnesses recall hearing gunshots. Exactly how many is unclear.
I was sitting in my bedroom and I sat up and all I heard was 3 gunshots. That was it. And we just heard 5 shots. We had to tell the kids to get down on the ground. This is ridiculous.
Mike Dirks is a regular, says he knew something was wrong right away.
The door was locked, so I looked in the window, and the young man had blood running out of his head. And I said, hey, buddy, I know all these people. And I said, open the door, please. Are you okay?
All right, as of right now, the Broward Sheriff's Office says that clerk not facing any charges, but they do tell us this is all still under investigation.
And what I wonder, do you think the clerk gets fired? They took the money. They pistol whipped him. On the video, you can see the clerk getting whipped. I mean, they just smack him in the face with a handgun. They rob him, so it's an armed robbery. They run out. He chases them, shoots one of them. Do you think Valero will end up firing him for endangering customers or violating company policy? He won't face any charges. I think it's a justifiable homicide. It's a good taxpayer relief shot. But the question is whether or not he ends up in trouble from the company. The next one comes to us from DeKalb County, Georgia.
With a machete broke into a home on North Lake Trail. Good day's Mark Teichner joins us now. And Mark, good morning. That homeowner fought back.
Yeah, he certainly did. And because of that, the person who broke into the house, who's being described as apparently the next door neighbor of the homeowner, is dead. We are on North Lake Trail. This is an unincorporated Doraville where this all took place this morning, about 5:30 in the morning. According to police, a man described as in his 30s, maybe late 30s, was armed with a machete, and he broke a couple of the glass panes on 2 different doors, made entry into the house, and was confronted by the homeowner. The homeowner shot that man. Paramedics did rush the person who had broken into the house, according to police, to the hospital, but he did not survive. At this point, they're trying to figure out why in the world he would do this. They do think that the man who broke into the house likely is the next door neighbor, so they're trying to figure out what would make him break into his neighbor's home.
What we're trying to find out now, we're trying to get this guy positively ID'd. He possibly lived next door. We don't know what kind of contact, what kind of relationship they have, as some type of acquaintance. But we get information that this guy just came uninvitedly and tried to break inside the residence, and we are still trying to conduct an investigation to find out why.
Police say in the middle of the night they got calls from neighbors about 1:30 in the morning saying that someone was at the house screaming at the top of their lungs. Police officers arrived on the scene but couldn't find anybody. They don't know if this supposed party that led to that 911 call had anything to do with the shooting that happened a few hours later. Obviously still trying to investigate. We're going to have more coming up at 10 o'clock. But for
What do you think? So a homeowner shoots and kills a burglar who was carrying a machete at 5:30 in the morning, breaks in a couple of windows to gain entry into the house. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good, clean taxpayer relief shot. And now we go back to Florida.
I'm Eric Rako with some breaking news here at the Live Desk. A deadly home invasion overnight in north central Florida. Marion County deputies tell us they found one suspect dead at a home in Summerfield. Another suspect and the homeowner, they were shot. The sheriff's office confirms 2 other suspects are being questioned. Investigators are still looking into what happened. They are on scene right now.
So just think about this. We always hear about you don't need a high capacity magazine, whatever that's supposed to mean. So you're at home, 4 intruders start to break into your home. How many rounds do you need to fire off to neutralize 4 intruders? Now, according to the story, the Marion County Sheriff's Office said the deputies found 1 man dead and 2 others, including the homeowner, with gunshot wounds. That means probably everybody in the house had a gun. The 4 people breaking into the home and the homeowner. Homeowner's in serious condition, but at least investigators tell the newspaper that 4 men entered the property, surrounded by dense woods. Apparently one of them entered the home and was shot by the homeowner. The second man was hit during an exchange of gunfire. No additional details available. And none are really needed. All I know is, I go back, think about that. So the other story, you got a neighbor with a machete that starts breaking in windows to get into your home. Pretty clean taxpayer relief shot. This one, you have 4 intruders, at least one. I say at least one, we don't know, maybe all 4, but at least one of which had a weapon, apparently starts firing at you. You fire back. 2 classic, good taxpayer relief shots. And just because it's Friday, I may make this part of the theme of the Michael Brown Unplugged. I give you the self-avowed communist socialist Bernie Sanders.
What's something that people get wrong about you?
They think I'm grumpy all of the time, and I'm only grumpy most of the time. There's sometimes I'm not grumpy. Now is not one of those times.
Grumpy. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode. You know the drill. Find us over on iTunes. Hey, do me a favor. If you go over to iTunes, if you could leave a 5-star rating, greatly appreciated. If you have time to write a short review, that's appreciated even more. And, of course, you can now get us on the iHeart app. You can download, you set it up. So every morning, the podcast is right there on your iHeart app. Or you can still listen to us on Spreaker, Spotify, Stitcher, and all the other places. And then finally, don't forget, go to michaelbrowntoday.com and follow us on all the social media pages. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those at michaelbrowntoday.com. Everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday.